So for years, one of the points I've made in public lectures and public talks and class lectures is that astronomy is one of the most democratic of sciences. You don't need letters after your name or a white lab coat or even a telescope. You can just go out and look at the sky. And I usually punctuate that with the phrase, "You can't take the sky from me." Those of you who know where that comes from, those of you who don't are about to find out. I'm Mike Siegel, I'm an astrophysicist, and this is The Throughput. So I've talked about the series Firefly a couple of times on this channel. In my spaceships review, I talked about Serenity, the main ship of the series Firefly, and how much I love that ship. In my captain's video, we talked about Malcolm Reynolds and his qualities as a leader and as a captain. And so I thought maybe I'd do a little review of the series and especially of the movie. For those of you familiar, you can skip ahead a little bit. I have bookmarks below. But for those of you who don't, here's the story. Firefly was a 2001 TV series, sort of a sci-fi western. It only had half a season before it got canceled, and it wasn't very well supported. It moved around, and the stories were shown out of order, which is bad for a series that kind of builds on character development. However, it developed a second life on DVD, and fans clamored for a continuation. Eventually, in 2005, we got a movie. Now, there was hope that that would lead to the series returning. It didn't turn out to be the case, so the movie was a finale to the series on TV. The setup for Firefly goes like so. The human race has moved to another star system which has dozens of planets and hundreds of moons, which allows massive expansion. The technologically advanced inner worlds formed the alliance and then forcefully incorporated the less advanced outer worlds in there in something called the Unification War. The series follows the adventures of Malcolm Reynolds, a veteran of the losing side of that war, as he pilots the cargo ship Serenity around the star system, trying to make a living and keep out of the sights of the Alliance and just get by. The series kicks off when two passengers come aboard his ship, Simon and River Tam. Simon is a doctor who broke his sister out of an Alliance facility where she was being experimented upon for unknown reasons. Another danger that is presented in this universe are the cannibalistic pirate reavers. Now, I thought I would do the movie for two reasons. One, the movie was my entree into the series. I did not watch the TV series when it was on the air. I was at a conference and heard other astronomers talking about how great the movie was, so I watched it. And I liked it so much I did something unusual for me, which is to buy the Firefly series sight unseen on DVD. And I fell in love with it. And every now and then I get to introduce someone to it who has never seen it before, like I'm introducing my daughter to it right now. And it's just a delight to see them get into it. But the other reason is that the movie was designed to appeal to people like me who had not seen the series. So it covers some of the backstory. You can go in without having seen the series. It brings things to a conclusion and covers a lot of the scientific concepts I would want to go over with the series. So let's just dive right in.
Earth that was could no longer sustain our numbers. We were so many. We found a new solar system. Dozens of planets and hundreds of moons. Each one terraformed, a process taking decades to support human life.
We're here in the founding myth of Firefly, and I did want to talk about this a little bit. You should know I tend to be skeptical about movies that have as their premise that the Earth becomes overpopulated or we use up all the resources or something like that. 50 years ago, that was a legitimate concern. As a concern nowadays, it's pretty much diminished. Human population is starting to level off. The only reason it's growing at all is because people are living longer. If you look at birth rates, it looks like we're going to sort of level off in the mid-century and may actually decline by the end of the century. We're also getting much better about resources. There are still challenges, but for example, we're feeding way more people on less land than we ever have before. So these dystopias where Earth becomes uninhabited and we use up all the resources seem to be less and less scientifically grounded with each passing day. Moreover, if you're going to leave the Earth, how do you get to another solar system? There's no faster than light travel in the Firefly universe. So you're going to have one of three ways. Either generational ships that take hundreds of years and you go through many people living on those ships until you get to your habitation. Cryogenic suspension. We do see cryogenic suspension in this series, so that exists. Or you could have, like you had in Interstellar, race banks, like fertilized eggs that you can then grow new humans out of once you get there. Maybe the first one's being raised by robots. But if you were going to do something like that, if you're going to abandon the Earth, if the Earth became uninhabitable, why not inhabit the solar system? Mars could be terraformed just as easily as the planets in this solar system. Venus, you could establish colonies in the clouds. Maybe some of the Jovian moons, you could make it habitable. at least underneath the surface. And so this really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, notice I said founding myth of Firefly. I actually suspect that part of the story here of why they left Earth and how they came to this new solar system is an alliance myth. That there's actually a different story that they sort of forgot or covered up for various reasons. So I suspect there's a little bit more to that story. Now, a planet with dozens of planets, hundreds of moons, is that feasible? At the time this movie was made, I would have said maybe, and now I would say definitely. We know of thousands of exoplanets out there, and we know of systems that have many planets within the habitable zone. And remember, our methods of looking for exoplanets are limited. We can only see them under certain circumstances, like if the planet is passing between us and the star. So there may be star systems out there that are even more complex than we see. And we're limited in the size and scale and distance of the planets that we can see. We have limitations on how far we can explore that parameter space. So given what we have seen so far, when we're still only a couple of decades into the era of exoplanets, I think this is perfectly reasonable that you could have a star system where you had dozens of planets in the habitable zone that may not be habitable when you get there, but with some work could become habitable by human beings. And as for hundreds of moons, exomoon science is a burgeoning field of astrophysics that will probably become very important over the next few decades. As I noted in my Star Wars video, if you took Jupiter and moved it close enough to its star that it was like these hot Jupiters we find, its moons might be habitable. So I think that the Firefly universe is one of the more better world-built universes that's in science fiction, and I think it's a very good setup for this series.
Let's amp it up, Delcy, and they drop. See, most of our best work is done when they're asleep. We can monitor and direct their subconscious, implant suggestions. It's a little startling to see at first, but the results are spectacular. Especially in this case. River Tam is our star pupil. I've heard that.
So right away we get a insight into River Tam's backstory, where someone within the Alliance is conducting medical experiments. It's revealed in the series that River is a prodigy, a genius, and also very physically talented. And so we find out that they're basically turning her into a weapon, someone who is psychic, who can spy on people, someone who is very physically trained and can kill people if necessary. This plugs into kind of a shady history that we have in this country of, say, the MK Ultra experiments. American citizens were unwittingly experimented on by the CIA using drugs such as LSD to see if they could be made more psychologically suggestive, or if LSD and other drugs could be used to interrogate Soviet agents and so forth. There have been other kinds of experiments, never something this elaborate or trying to create a super soldier or anything like that. That's pure science fiction. But the idea that you would have a tyrannical government that would try to identify genius, physically talented people that it could turn into weapons is not that far-fetched from some of the things that we have seen that actually exist. I don't know that you could train them so well that a small woman like this would be able to kick the butt of a very large mercenary like Jane, but, we'll go with it. So this is the operative sort of signature move of hitting someone in the back and twisting his arm and paralyzing them. Pure science fiction. There's no nerve cluster down there that if you stimulate it is going to cause someone paralysis. We have a spine. It has nerves that come out and go through the body at various points. Even if you could paralyze the nerves there, you'd paralyze them from the waist down, not their entire body. And even if you could paralyze someone that way, that means that they would collapse. Standing still like that takes muscle control. It takes tensing muscles. We don't think about it that way because when we stand, we are not aware of the effort we're keeping. But if you were to paralyze someone instantly, their muscles would kind of go limp. This is entirely fantastical. It's sort of like the Vulcan neck pinch of Firefly, but it's a little bit silly. It's such a beautiful ship. So I do like this opening sequence. It has a bit of technical mumbo jumbo about primary buffer panels and stuff like that. But it does show something very accurate, which is that when you are traveling in space, re-entry into a planetary atmosphere is probably going to be one of the most dangerous moments. So the way re-entry works is you hit the atmosphere and your extreme velocity causes the air in front of you to compact to extremely high density. What happens when you compress air? It gets extremely hot. And so you get this superheated gas in front of the ship. And that causes the ship to start to ablate, to melt away parts of the ship. A lot of people think it's friction that causes that heat. It's not. It's the compaction of the air in front of the ship. So this is why heat panels and heat shields are so critically important, because if there is a break in that heat shield, those superheated gases are going to get inside the ship and start ripping it apart. That is, in fact, what happened to the Space Shuttle Columbia. They had damage to their heat tiles, and the superheated gas was able to get inside the wing of the spacecraft and eventually destroy it. That's one of the big concerns they had when Apollo 13 returned, that when they found out that the service module had exploded, they worried that it had damaged the heat shield in the process, and that superheated gas would get in and they would only hear silence when Apollo 13 re-entered. Fortunately, that had not happened. So while there's a lot of technical mumbo jumbo here, and this sequence mainly serves to introduce the crew and to give you a sort of one shot through the entirety of Serenity, so you get a familiarity with the layout of the ship and so forth. It's serving a narrative purpose here. I do like that they actually have this sort of dangerous re-entry where things are kind of scary and bumpy, because that actually is kind of how it is in real life.
These reefers, the last 10 years, they show up like the bogeyman from stories. Eating people alive? Where does that get from?
Shepherd Book said they was men who just reached the edge of space, saw a vasty nothingness, and went Bibbledy over it.
At this point in the movie, there's been an attack by Reavers, these insane, cannibalistic monsters who just attack and destroy colonies and spaceships, and for no apparent reason. What she's saying is that Shepherd Book, one of the characters' theories, is that they were driven mad by the emptiness of space. This turns out not to be the case, but it's not an unreasonable speculation. Early in the space program, there was real concern that the isolation of space would drive astronauts crazy. That it's not just that they're isolated in a small tin can and so forth, it's that awareness that they are thousands of miles from the nearest human being, or if they went to the moon, hundreds of thousands of miles from the nearest human being, and whether that would actually make them go crazy. And so there were experiments that they did where they would put them in isolation chambers and so forth to see if they would go crazy. And some of them actually did almost mentally lose it being isolated like that, where some of them were fine with it. So Shepherd Book's speculation turns out to be wrong, but I don't think it's an unreasonable speculation on his behalf to say that maybe it was just the emptiness of space that drove them crazy.
You think you're in a hot place?
That's what we're looking to learn. Is there any follow-up on Newswave?
There is no news. There's the truth of the signal.
What I see.
This was the first time that you see this in the movie, which is different from the TV series. In the TV series, there's no faster than light travel. And there's also, as far as I can recall, no faster than light communication. It takes days, weeks, maybe even months to get from planet to planet. You can only have instantaneous communication when you're actually on a planet or in orbit around the planet. Otherwise, it takes hours for messages to get out. And that's a realistic depiction of what it would be like in a system if you did not have faster than light communications or travel. Because it's a movie, it wants things on this very fast time scale and wants things to happen very quickly without these long periods of in between. These are plot developments that if they had happened in the series would have taken place over months or many episodes. We see multiple instances of this where they're instantaneously communicating with people across the star system and traveling between planets in a matter of hours and so forth, where they're on one planet and then they go out to the edge of space where the Reaver planet is, and then they come back and it's only hours or even minutes that pass. It is an inaccuracy in the movie and something that the movie, I think, missteps in. I understand why it does it, because you can't have, we're going to this planet. Months later, this is what happens. They're trying to keep the pace going, but it is one of those things where I think the movie stumbles and the TV series got it right.
It's the PAX. The G23 Paxilon hydrochloride that we added to the air processors. It was supposed to calm the population, weed out aggression. There's 30 million people here and they all just let themselves die. I have to be quick. About 0.1% of the population had the opposite reaction to the pact. Their aggressor response increased beyond madness. They have become... well, they've killed most of us.
This is where we find out both the answer to what happened to River and the mystery of the Reavers. That River discovered the secret of the Reavers, which was that this planet Miranda, they put a chemical into the air processors to make the population more peaceful. And most of the population died out, and 0.1%, 1 in 1,000, about 30,000 of them, turned into these hyper-violent, crazed creatures. This does not cross me as that far of a stretch. When you're talking about psychoactive medicines, there is a lot of work that is done, a lot of testing that is done to see what the long-term effects are going to be. People who take psychoactive medicines like antidepressants or things like that are going to be taking them for a year. So you do look into long-term effects and what these are going to do to people over the long haul. It would seem from what she's saying that they put this into the air. It took a few years for these negative effects to come out. And that crosses me as realistic, that this stuff could build up in people's systems and gradually change them to the point where they became so placid they allowed themselves to die. One of the comments my wife made when she saw this was, boy, the Alliance doesn't believe in phase 3 testing of medicines. And I said, well, this was their phase 3 test. If you have a ruthless government that doesn't care about people and simply sees them as assets, it seems quite reasonable that they'd see 30 million people as a way to test out a medicine. And if it kills them all, well, that was just a one planet. You have dozens more. The thing of creating the Reavers, of this paradoxical effect, that is a real thing. There are many medicines that have paradoxical effects. The high blood pressure medicine that will raise blood pressure in some people instead of lowering it. And it is especially true of psychoactive medicines. There are antidepressants where they monitor people to make sure that their symptoms actually don't get worse and they commit suicide. There are anti-anxiety medicines like benzodiazepines, which for most people reduce anxiety, but for a small percentage will have that paradoxical reaction of increasing anxiety. Why is this? Because the human body isn't a machine. It's not a computer. And the human mind especially is not a machine. It's not a computer. You can't just put things in and know how it will react. Sometimes it reacts to things in ways you didn't anticipate. That's why you test. That's why you see what happens. That's why many people who take medicine to help them with their mental health, including myself, you have to try out different medicines before you find one that works for you. Because sometimes one medicine will have a paradoxical effect, sometimes it will have really unpleasant side effects, and then you might find one that really works, that takes care of your symptoms without giving you the side effects, and so forth. And sometimes people after years will have to change medicines because their body builds up a tolerance or whatever. And so this is a very active area of research, a very fraught area of research. And so this plot point, that crosses me as certainly exaggerated and fantastical. You don't need to worry that your Lexapro is going to turn you into a Reaver, but very rooted in real science, real pharmacology, real things that we see in the real world. And so I think this is a great plot point, a great explanation for what happened to the Reavers and how they came about and what happened to this planet. And tells you a lot about the Alliance, that they would try this experimental medicine on a planet of 30 million people, and when it killed them all, cover it up.
As sure as I know anything, I know this. They will try again. Maybe on another world, maybe on this very ground swept clean. A year from now, 10, they'll swing back to the belief that they can make people better. And I do not hold to that. So no more running. I aim to misbehave.
So this is Malcolm's big speech, and that last line is one of the most famous of the movie, where I want to talk about what comes before, where he says they will swing to the idea that they can make people better. So the biggest problems of the 19th and 20th centuries were caused by this idea that you could make people better. It sometimes showed up in things like prohibition. We'll ban alcohol, and that will make people not drink. And oh, there's a crime wave, and people kept drinking anyway, and it actually made the problem worse. Oh, we're going to have eugenics and we'll kill off the genetically inferior and breed superhumans. Not only was it morally horrific, it wouldn't work because our genetic diversity makes us stronger as a species. The apotheosis of this effort to make people better could possibly be seen in, say, the Cultural Revolution in China, or even more horrifically, the Year Zero experiment in Cambodia, where the Khmer Rouge believed that they could reset humanity's culture and rebuild it into the perfect socialist model. There is a mentality that has shown up from time to time in governments that they can force people to be better, that they can make humans better, that they can overcome human nature. Andrew Donaldson, who did my captain's video with me, likes to say human nature is undefeated. And it is. You can't really change people. You can create the conditions under which they can improve themselves. Over the last century, we have seen levels of violence drop dramatically. We have seen the amount of wars drop dramatically. We have seen health improve dramatically. We have seen human beings improve. I'm reading a book right now about the early 19th century and the temperance movements that dramatically cut the amount of alcoholism in the United States. But it was a voluntary thing. It persuaded people to forsake alcohol and to improve themselves. It didn't try to force them into that. When we tried to force people into that with prohibition, it was a disaster. This idea speaks to me not only from the plot point, but as a scientist. Science has often been employed in this idea that you can make people better, especially when you're talking about something like eugenics, where people thought science has proven that we can improve the breed. No, it hadn't. I can see authoritarian governments turning to drugs, turning to this sort of thing, turning to brainwashing to try to make people better. Go back to the MK Ultra experiments. The experiments that they did on our own people were to see if they could get Soviet agents to talk. But it's not a big leap from that to see if they could use these chemicals to make a population that was more compliant, that was more peaceful, that was less crime-ridden and so forth. So it's not that big of a leap to think here, especially when you're talking about a government that is as obsessed with technology and as obsessed with conformity as the Alliance is. And what Mal says here about how they will try again, they will. When you see horrific human experiments gone wrong, you usually will find people making excuses saying, well, this wasn't tried, or if they'd done this, it would have worked, and so forth. I can perfectly see the Alliance saying, well, just if we had a different drug, that would work, and then we'd be able to make people better. So I think this is just another wonderful plot point that gets into this and really speaks to me as a scientist of how there are people who think you can improve humanity. The history of that is just replete with awful things. And so this is one of the areas where I think the movie really triumphs.
Now!
I do like the lack of sound, or the very subdued sound that's in that, where he's firing the cannon and the ship is exploding. Now in the final battle, they have lots of noises and things exploding and crashing into each other, and the sound crew banging on cans and stuff like that. That's kind of actually explained that they have this ion cloud around the planet, so you're actually in a medium that would convey sound. But I would love to see a series kind of like the way The Expanse does it, where you have these more silent encounters in space, because I do think it adds a quality to it that makes them a little more distinctive.
It's not even changing course.
Sir?
Target the Reavers. Target the Reavers. Target everyone. Somebody fire!
This is where the movie gets into some really silliness with the physics here of this battle and so forth. I'm willing to forgive quite a bit here at this point because I've enjoyed the movie so much, but a lot of this is just silliness, especially where the battle begins, where you have this one fleet parked near the planet and another fleet coming in like that. If you've watched my 2001 video, you know that gravity still exists in space. If you park your fleet up there just above Mr. Universe's Dominion or whatever, you're either going to have to keep your engines firing to keep you from falling, or you're just going to fall back down onto the planet. What you have to be is in orbit, and that means going around the planet. And especially, you're not really blocking Malcolm's approach, because if you're sitting up there up in space, he can circle around and come up below you to get to his destination. And so what would actually have made more sense here is to put a sphere of ships around the planet to intercept him and so forth, and for the Reavers to come in and then everyone to sort of change their orbits and rush in. That's not as exciting as the movie wanted. That takes time. And I understand why they do the things they do, but it is inaccurate to portray it this way. So lots of silliness in here. There is actually one part that is kind of accurate, where the Serenity goes into a flat spin when she loses power and is falling down. That is an actual thing that happens to airplanes in the air, and it is extremely dangerous and extremely difficult to pull yourself out of. It also shows up more famously in the movie Top Gun, where they go into a flat spin. That is probably one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a spacecraft or an aircraft. And so I did appreciate that bit of it. But this is kind of Star Warsy in what's going on here. I've already made it clear that I love this series and I love this movie. Most TV series take a little while to get going. Babylon 5, one of my other favorite series, the first season is kind of uneven and it takes a while, and then by the end you're kind of into this rhythm, and by the second season it's hit that rhythm and it's going great. Star Trek The Next Generation famously was really uneven for its first 2 seasons, and in that third season really hit its rhythm and was great for the next 4 seasons. Firefly hit the ground running. It was great from the beginning, and that's why it's so beloved, because even though we only got half a season and it was canceled, the character development, the writing, the chemistry of the cast was just great. And if you haven't seen it, I do strongly recommend it, because it's not a huge commitment. It's only half a season, but I think you'll really fall in love with it and find this movie, even if it's not perfect, at least a satisfying wrap up of some of the bigger threads from the series. As a scientist, though, both the movie and the series I find a lot to like. I love this idea of having a single solar system with all these planets and all these moons where there's takes time to travel between places, and some places are super advanced and some places are like the Wild West. It was an aesthetic they were looking for with a space western. The idea of the Alliance, the way it is portrayed through its actions and not with words, that it used this planet as a guinea pig, that when it killed all the people, it wiped them out, that when the Reavers came out, it tried to pretend they didn't exist and then tried to blame them on other things. I really think that there's a lot of great storytelling that goes on in this, using the tools of science. This idea of a drug that creates this paradoxical reaction is real science. This idea of doing experiments on people to try to unlock their potential, that's a little fantastic, but is based on real science. The way they portray space travel, the way they portray the communications, it's all very grounded in kind of real science. And I think that's obviously not a big part of the series. The characters and the acting and the writing were, I would think, the bigger things. But it gives this baseline. It's sort of like set dressing that gives the series that verisimilitude that lets you buy into it, that lets you believe what you're seeing, that lets you suspend disbelief the way you need to when you watch science fiction. And I think Firefly does that very well and very subtly. So that's one of the reasons why the series has endured and why I and many other people continue to enjoy it. In terms of ratings, I'm probably going to give the original Firefly 2 face palms. It's set in one little solar system, and for the most part doesn't do anything terribly outrageous and keeps things on a realistic, grounded basis. For the movie, I might add another facepalm because it shrinks that star system down so things happen on a much more rapid time scale, and it has that Star Wars-esque fight sequence at the end. But you could make a case for 2 facepalms because the basic plot points connect to real science and real scientific concepts. So just a quick review of that. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with something else. Please subscribe and recommend this video to everyone so we can build the channel. But until we talk again, I'm Mike Siegel. I write for Ordinary Times. Thank you for watching.